this last part of the day, we're going to have a panel discussion, and then we're going to open it out to you guys again, because I feel like there's so many people out there we still haven't heard from, and it'd be wonderful to hear from you before you go home. We're going to ask the question, it's quite a big question, which is, what would the future look like if we listened to the land? Yeah, so it's a big question, but I feel that in this room we have all the knowledge, all the inspiration, and possibly the other than human support to actually really apply ourselves to that. I'm going to start off by asking that question to each of our panel, and I'm going to start to my right with Manda Scott. Manda, I'll just quickly introduce you. Is a very well-known podcaster. She's the host of the Accidental Gods podcast. She's an author of many books, and the most recent book, she's also a shamanic practitioner, I should also say, and her most recent book, Inner Human Power, is doing very well, and it actually looks at this very question. So, over to you. I'd wanted to just say, because one of the things you often talk about is what would the generations that are yet to be born, what would life look like for them?
Thank you. Thank you, yes. Thank you to the lady in the front. I'll show you a copy later. So, commitment to authenticity and integrity. Last time someone asked me this was at Nairn Literary Festival, and I led a visualization, which I won't do because we haven't got time. But the fact that I could lead what was basically a shamanic journey at a very sober, normal, middle-of-the-road literary festival pleases me greatly, actually. They let me sing, which is, for those of you who work with me shamanically know is not a pleasant thing, but it does evoke a certain amount of power. I don't know exactly what it looks like. I know what it feels like. And then I think what matters is that we have in our heart space a sense of waking up in the morning and knowing that the world is okay, waking up feeling safe, waking up feeling confident that whatever the day brings, and knowing that it will be wholly unpredictable, that I have the connections within myself, within my communities, my human communities, a place of passion, of purpose. And more importantly and fundamentally, I have a connection to the web of life, such that I can ask of it, what do you want of me? And respond to that in every moment, and change, I think, pivoting as necessary. And that combination, self, community, web of life, knowing that I am held, knowing that I am doing what is mine to do, what only I can do and what I can do best, and bringing that to a community of the human and the more than human world where I share respect and pride. I have pride in what I do because I know that I am bringing everything of myself in service to life. And I am surrounded by people who I respect who are doing the same. And so we have that serotonin mesh of reciprocity that defines what Francis Weller calls an initiation culture. So Francis Weller learned with Malidoma Somé and was a trauma counselor, and he suggests there's a binary, and I'm not really very fond of binaries, but this one works more or less, that for all of human history, 300,000 years of our evolution as foragers and hunters and managers of the land, and in all of the indigenous First Peoples, First Nations peoples around the world, we have intermittent, episodic, contained encounters with death. And the containment is held by the elders, by the community, and by the more than human world, and that we are taken to the edges of ourselves within this containment, to the point where it's an encounter with death that could become an actual death, and then we have to ask for help. And we have to ask for help within ourselves, and particularly we have to ask for help from everything that is the more than human world. And we have to be able to receive that help, and we have to act on it, and when we act on it, we come back, and we come back into our community, we come back with that set of resources. And if we don't, then we don't come back. And Francis Weller's alternate culture is the trauma culture. And somewhere, 10, 12,000 years ago, before we started what we, in our extraordinary separate trauma culture, call the agricultural revolution, as if that was a good thing, when we learned to tame and control the land and enslave the animals, you can only do that if you've lost your sense of being an integral part of the web of life. 10,000 years is a long time. I think in the islands of Britain, in these lands, the Romans brought the trauma culture, so 2,000 years, but still, we have many generations, and ours is the generation where we need to do the work of the healing. If we can heal ourselves to the point where we can listen to the web of life in every moment, then all we have to do is ask what we want. What does it want of us? And respond in real time. So that would be my answer, is we are in community with ourselves, with our people, with our place, with all of the more than human world, and we are asking moment by moment, what do you want? And we are responding with total flexibility and total confidence to that.
Thank you, Manda. And if we are able to do that, what does life on this planet look like for the 7 generations away that you talk about?
I genuinely don't know, because we're not going back to an indigenous past. We're going forward to an initiation culture in the 21st century, which will, of necessity, because here we are, involve digital worlds that did not used to exist. So I think it will look much greener, much quieter, much calmer, much kinder. There will be clean land, clean air, clean soil, clean souls. Clean as in clean able to connect, not clean as in a value judgment, but clean as in I know how to connect. And what that looks like is an emergent property of whoever's there. And they build what emerges in the moment. And the point about emergent systems, we're back to Ilya Prigogine, and when any system reaches maximal complexity, it reaches a bifurcation point where it can either crash into extinction or it can emerge into a new system. I would say we are at that bifurcation point now. And the point about emergence into a new system is that it's wholly unpredictable from the system that was before it. If we could predict it, it's not a new system, it's just painting the wheels on the bus a different color. So I don't think we can know, but we can set the conditions for emergence. And those conditions are values of gratitude, compassion, joyful curiosity, total connection, and utterly giving everything of ourselves in service to life. And if everybody does that, then I think emergence happens, and wouldn't that be exciting?
Name those 3 again.
Gratitude, 3 pillars of the heart-mind: gratitude, compassion, and that joyful curiosity that says, God, this is so amazing. I wonder what happens next. And that lets our head minds, that in our culture we are taught that our head mind knows what's coming next, that we have to be able to predict, that we have to pull lever A and then B happens and then we get to the result we want. And that's never how it works, because we are not a complicated linear system, we're a complex system. But by saying, this is so amazing, I wonder what happens next, we free our head minds from having to think that it knows. There's the responsibility of having an answer. And we can settle into our heart minds, which then connect to the web of life. And the web of life is the complex system that has the answer. Does that work?
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. Colin, Campbell, you were raised in Botswana and educated there into the traditions of Botswana. In fact, you're a lineage holder of those traditions. And I've heard you talk about that one of the most important parts of your life has been bringing those traditions to the West. What are the traditions that us in the West now need to be embracing? And if we do, how could life start to change for us?
Thank you. These are colossal questions. And I'll do my best to nutcase it in a tiny little fragment of the time we have here. So the traditions in Southern Africa are numerous. But I think the primary commonality of all the traditions in Southern Africa is that they all recognize that law, that is the way that we organize ourselves as human beings, both in relation to each other and then in the relation to the rest of creation, is the great law. And the great law is written in the book of nature. The natural world speaks it. And so the traditions are oriented and organize themselves around that recognition. They recognize that the rainfall in where we live depends on how we as humans behave and on how the rest of nature behaves and what we do, and that everything that we do has profound implications for everyone else. They also recognize that everyone out there is not an it, but a who. In other words, everything lives. Everything has a spirit, the same spirit that we have, and that we're in the commune of spirit. And I've been brewing on this question, what would the future look like if we kind of began to recognize some of these things? And we can take a fragment of that and vision into it or dream into it a little bit. So imagine the oceans. So the oceans are a spirit, right? They're the spirit of water. And it's water in its completeness. But then, of course, the sun comes along, the great burning fire in the sky. And what happens? The water is allured by the sun, and it begins to leave its wholeness, and it begins to separate out, and it gets drawn into the sky. And then the winds come along, and they blow the water in its vaporous form inland. And this is the important thing. In every drop of that water, we could say, is the memory of its home in its wholeness as the ocean, and a yearning deep inside it to return to that. And what happens? Well, at some point, it begins its journey back. And how does it do that? It begins it by falling. So it falls out of the sky as dew. It falls out of the sky as rain, as precipitation, and it lands on the earth, and then it begins its journey back to the ocean. And it does that by seeping, by falling, by tumbling, by raging down, but always downwards, always back towards the earth, at least towards the ocean, to where it belongs, essentially. And I think that it's an image, really, because I think in every single one of us is a deep yearning to return to a state that we can't necessarily articulate. In fact, we can't articulate it. We can't give it words. But we could say, well, completeness, totality, wholeness. We have a yearning to do that. And where I think we have been as humans up until now, because our creation story tells us that way back then we left our biome having accosted fire, and the capacity to leave our biome and then head out across the earth and settle and find our place there. That was an outward journey. It was the quest of being human, the process of going out to become. But I think, and this is merely my view on this situation, I think we've reached a point where we're turning now, and we're now confronted with the notion of return. So rather than going out and conquering, the yearning is brewing up inside us of a recognition that there is somewhere from which we've come, which we're called in some way to return to. And how do we do that? That's the real question. So we can learn from water in that. What does water do? Well, there's this ubiquitous force in the universe, which we know very little about, but we have done our best to try and figure out, this force we call gravity. And what water does is it submits to gravity. And it says, I simply trust that if I submit, if I let go, ultimately, I will be drawn back into that wholeness. And so the return journey, I suggest to you, might be this process of letting go, of relinquishing, of releasing. And in so doing, we fall back towards our totality, our wholeness. Another word for that might be love. So gravity might be an image for love. What is love? We can't describe either of them, but what we know about them is that they are a force and that they are ubiquitous in the universe in some sense, and that our call is to fall into them. And in falling into them, there is a returning that happens, which is a deep motif in most spiritual traditions, this idea of return, and the notion that that return requires a relinquishment, a letting go, a faith, a trust in something vast and big, much, much more than we are. And so I think that more and more in the world to come, the call is to begin to, I would say, cultivate a sense of trust in this idea that it's not, we're not called to go out there and turn trees into planks and make tables and mountains into cars and aeroplanes and all these other things. We're called to let go. And that's a terrifying thought from us, because I think it's relatively unprecedented as human. As long as we've been human, we've been going out and we've been reaching and we've been grasping and we've been trying to overcome and get more and become bigger and greater and better and evolve and all these things. But now, in this cycle of return, we're asked to do virtually the opposite. And that's going to be a monumental thing for us, because I don't think as yet we have really been faced with that as something we're called to do. So what does that look like in practical terms? Well, I think a lot of it is a cultivation of a trust, an inherent trust in something that is bigger than us, that is drawing us back towards wholeness, that doesn't require us to come up with tremendous concepts, that doesn't require us to grapple and grasp and try to overcome, but actually requires us to fall into a trust, a faith, a recognition that there is something there that is drawing us back to a totality, and that it's going to be more about what we don't do than what we do. Because quite honestly, our doing at the moment is driving us into a really difficult place. So if we just stop doing it, what would happen? And that's, I think, something we could perhaps look at.
Colin, wow. That's incredible to consider all of that. And it makes me think about something that I've heard across many different disciplines, which is that there's two great motivational forces in the whole of life. There is fear and there is love. And I think what you're saying is it's time to go back to love, trust, and letting go. I'd like to ask you how, but I think we might come to that in a bit, because I'm going to hand over now to Rupert and just introduce you to everyone. Rupert Sheldrake, a very well-known biologist, author of at least 9 books and many, many papers. And your theory on morphic resonance was quite controversial in the scientific community, but incredibly well received and excited a lot of people, certainly people in this room. If we were to look at a future where that theory was actually much more widely acceptable, what could that look like?
Thank you, Fran. Morphic resonance is a theory of memory in nature. It suggests there's a kind of collective memory in all things, in all species, in all plants, in all animals, even in all crystals. So it applies to everything. So in a sense, it's a bit too broad to inform our discussion since it applies to everything. But I think what's relevant here is this sense of connecting with what's happened before in collective memory. I'm English, and my ancestors, like the ancestors of all English people, lived in England and related to the land. Until the 17th century scientific revolution, most people took it for granted. We lived in a living world. Plants and animals were truly alive. Nature was alive. We lived on Mother Earth. and our collective life had to be related to the seasons and related to nature through thanksgiving, through prayer, and through ceremony. And that connection, I think, is something we need to reconnect with. We're always being told about honouring the ancestors, and right here in England we have ancestors. And one thing I think that's important here is to acknowledge them. For example, right here in Oxford, the patron saint of Oxford is a 6th century Saxon princess, St. Friedwide. She has a shrine in Oxford Cathedral in Christchurch. It's a place of pilgrimage. People come here because this herbalist woman, whose symbol is a branch of rosemary, was a woman who was connected with the natural world, as many people were. We're in a church dedicated to St. Columba. This is called St. Columba's Church. And St. Columba was an Irish saint who came over to Scotland and founded the monastery on the holy island of Iona. And like those early Irish and Celtic saints, it was all about living close to nature. It was about bringing the spirit close to nature. And one of the English Celtic saints, St. Cuthbert, who lived on the holy island of Lindisfarne, was famous for spending a lot of his time in cold water, up to his neck in cold water. He was a kind of early proponent of the Wim Hof method. Like many of these Celtic saints, there's a book by Nick Mayhew Smith called Naked Hermits about these early saints here in Britain. Their thing was not about being in cities and stuff. It was about being in remote, wild places, connecting with the spirit of nature. And then here in England, traditionally, in every parish, every centre of settlement is a church, a temple, the centre, the holy place where the ancestors are buried and the churchyard around it. And every year there would be ceremonies asking for blessings on the crop, and they still happen. The time it happens is Rogation Sunday, which this year is May the 25th. And these traditions still exist. And I was just about 5 or 6 years ago staying in a village in Somerset, Compton, Dundon, where my wife Jill was giving a workshop. And I went to the church on the Sunday, and it turned out to be Rogation Sunday. And after the service, there were about 20 people there. We went out into the churchyard, and then the priest asked everyone to face to the north, and we prayed for the whole north of the parish, and then to the east and the west and the south. We prayed to all directions for the parish, and the prayers were for the blessing on the land, for the blessings on the gardens, for the footpaths, for the woods, for all those who worked on the land. And that whole village felt to me completely different after this ceremony. It only lasted about 20 minutes, half an hour. But what's happening now in England is because since the 17th century, many people have the idea that we've risen above all these superstitions, we're smart, modern, scientific people. These ancient sacred centres in the centre of our villages, some of them are closing up. They're being sold off because no one goes to them. And they become second homes for interior designers from Chelsea. The centre of the village where people have been married, people have been buried, children have been christened for centuries. But fortunately, right now, there's a revival. This year, there's a revival of patronal festivals. At least 30 parishes, in rural parishes, will be, for the first time in decades, if not centuries, celebrating their patron saint and the festival of the whole village. In some places, there's a revival of the Rogation tradition of beating the bounds, walking round the boundary of the whole parish, asking for blessings on the land and giving thanks for the abundance of the land. We have these traditions here in Britain. Next Sunday is called Plough Sunday, when ploughs are taken into churches. In many places this still happens for the blessing of the tools of the agricultural trade. And I was given some sense of how powerful this can be when I lived in India. I used to work in agricultural research in India at an institute called ICRISAT in Hyderabad. The first year I was there, I was going into work on a big Indian festival day, Durga Puja, the goddess Durga, when people dedicate the tools of their trade and ask Durga to bless the tools of their trade. And when I arrived at our International Scientific Institute, I found that there were palm leaves all over the doors of my laboratory. My staff, my Hindu staff, asked me as head of the unit to get into our pickup truck and drive it forward a few inches because they put limes under the wheels. These were offerings to Durga, so crushed the limes. There were garlands, marigold garlands around our drying ovens and our balances in the laboratory. And my American colleague, who was head of the mainframe computer laboratory, was asked to break a coconut on a rock just in front of the mainframe computer so that Durga would bless the computer. Well, I think this is a wonderful tradition. I mean, what Indians have found is a way of taking ancient traditions and sacralizing the modern world, including mainframe computers. Whereas here it's seen as a mere archaic relic, some old-style plough. But I think that if I look to the future, I think it would be a way of finding ways of integrating what the traditions from our ancestors who believed they lived in a living, sacred world and who needed to relate to the land in a way and ask for blessings and give thanks for the blessings they had. Find new ways of doing that in accordance with our traditions and in accordance with our ancient sacred places. And this is not just some vague pipe dream. All over Europe at the moment, there's a revival of pilgrimage going on. My colleague Guy Hayward, who was here earlier today, as the director of the British Pilgrimage Trust, which is helping to reopen ancient footpath pilgrimage routes. There's an Irish friend here who's working with Pilgrim Paths in Ireland, which is reopening the ancient footpath pilgrimage routes in Ireland. And these are ways of connecting with sacred place, with the land, in a way that gives it meaning, pattern, and connection with what's gone before. This is not about signing up to a belief system. This is about taking part in practices that really do connect us, and connect us with our ancestors and connect us with the land. And I think we need to recover that sense, and we need to find new ways of doing it in accordance with our traditions. And I think those new ways are already happening here around us in Britain.
Thank you, Rupert. And I'm just reminded of what you said to me earlier. I know Guy has also talked about, is that as well as all of that, this pilgrimage and these rituals bring us back into relationship and therefore into a reciprocal relationship so that the land can also respond to us. So I'm always reminded that, like any good relationship, the other party needs some attention, doesn't it? So this is, would you like to?
Yes, absolutely. And one thing actually that related to that is that the Druids, who were the priests of the old religion here in parts of Britain, believed that the land had to be enchanted. And they had what they called perpetual choirs. They had people singing every day to keep the land enchanted. My wife, Jill Peirce, who gives workshops on chanting, makes the point that if we want our land to be re-enchanted, we can only do it if we chant. And actually, we do have perpetual choirs in Britain. In all our cathedrals, every day there's sung evening prayer, even choral evensong, sung by incredible choirs, which actually most people don't know it's happening. It's happening here in Oxford. 6:05 p.m. this evening, tomorrow evening. I plan to go tomorrow evening to Christ Church Cathedral. Every evening, there's a choir, beautifully trained choir, singing different music, evening prayers. And so actually, if only we could acknowledge it, this enchantment of our land is actually already happening. But we have to take part and we have to acknowledge it. So I think it's, there's more going on. If we open our eyes, we can see it's actually happening.
Thank you, Rupert. Now, Sandra, I'm sure you've got something to add to that. Just to introduce you, Sandra Salazar, you're a horticulturist. You grow in central London, where you also teach children. So you have a lot to do with future generations. Can I ask you, what are you wanting to pass on to them, or what are you wanting to bring out of what's already there for them, and what do you hope that their lives might be like?
Greetings, everyone. I'm going to start by thanking my ancestors, first and foremost, for allowing me the time and space to be here with you today. Thank you, Fran, Rachel, Dee, and all of you who are listening to me right now. So my answer to that is, that's a tough one. Sister Dee beautifully mentioned before Sankofa. Sankofa being a term that we use that means going back to your past, turning to your ancestors in order to move forward, and while doing that, planting a seed for generations to come. So traditionally, I feel that is the way forward, is going back to see what has already been done, right? And bringing that to today's society, today's world, while we are planting or we are sharing the knowledge with our children. Bearing in mind, someone else mentioned that, okay, we're now at the age of technology, so our children are an extension of us in a much more higher level of intelligence and much more. With our guidance and the guidance of our ancestors, and I think that's so important that they learn to honor our ancestors. They learn to honor the unseen forces, the unseen guides that are around us every day, constantly, and with that, build a future that is suitable for them and their children's and the children's of their children. And tradition is very important to make that happen because it gives us the tools. It gives us the practices that will support us to make sense of that does no longer make sense. You understand or understand? So there's so much. At this moment, there's overload of information, and that overload of information is what our children are very good at managing, so to speak. With the age of technology comes the age of somewhat being superficial. And I mean that with the utmost respect. But detachment from the tools and the practices that we know exists, right? Some of us have gone as far as taking time and space to work on ourselves so that we learn those practices. We can call it, let's call it shadow work, right? Growth, right? Where you look into yourself in order for you to be able to become your best version. So for me, as a mum, I'm a mum first and foremost before anything. I want to ensure that my child and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren and everybody's grandchildren have a world that is just, that is able to honor them as they honor this world, is able to feed them, right? No one wants to see our children being hurt. We want them to grow with love, humility, respect, but equally, they have to be challenged in order to grow. There's a concept that we have in the Dogon temple, which is the temple that I'm part of as well, which is chaos, right? Chaos being that middle point in your pH scale, that 7.5, where we have your alkaline and you have your acidity. And in the middle, right in the middle, that's where chaos lives. We think it's balance, and it is balance, right? But that's where life exists. Why? Because we need to learn through chaos in order for us to move up. We need, but our ancestors are the ones, right? Because they've already been through it. They're the ones that will give us the knowledge if we are willing to listen, right? And by listening and putting those simple steps into practice, which can be as simple as taking your shoes off, should I say, and going to the land. It can be as simple as waking up in the rising and doing your ablutions and praying to yourself that you have a good day, that your family has a good day, giving thanks and gratitude for the rise of the sun, the Ra, the great God Ra, so there is those simple practices that I integrate into my teachings so that my children are aware. And it may not click right now, but it will click later. So I guess my answer is creating a world that our children can be happy learning and not overwhelmed with information, with the utmost respect for our ancestors, the nature, and our elders. While with that respect comes the respect for the land, to create, a world that is in line, and it gives back. It doesn't take away too much, but it gives back. Does that answer the question? There was another question, right?
What are you manifesting in those children you're bringing onto your land?
Oh, happiness, joy, energy. Those that can see energy can see the colors that the children bring, the laughter. And we learn so much from them because they're sponges. And actually, they're way more intelligent than we are because they're still connected with nature's divine supreme intelligence. They can see, they're just so much more advanced. But they're so fragile and so innocent and pure, and that is worth protecting and nurturing and guiding. So I want to see a world where our children are aware, they're well equipped, they are allowed to create, they are allowed to make mistakes, they are allowed to be children, they can definitely grow food for themselves, and also a world where they can give what they've been put in this world to give. I often tell my son, he's been growing food since he was 6 months old, he's 15 nearly, and I used to follow him. I started as a community horticulture teaching at his nursery. So I followed him from nursery to primary school, and then came secondary school. And he put his hand down. And he said, "Yo, Mum, no, you could no." Right, and I tried, and I was a governor, and I was like, "But let me just be a governor at your school." He was like, "No, it's time for you to stop now." But I want him to be natural. I understand that he has a different vision, so I'm really looking forward to seeing the world through his eyes. How they're going to bring. How they're going to make it happen. We have a traditional way of growing food, but let me see how they're going to grow, how they're going to use technology to show us their vision, so that we can tap into that as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that happening with the guidance and the tools that were passed down to me from the divine intelligence of nature, my ancestors and my elders. Asheo.
Thank you, Sandra. And you mentioned there that one of the things you do with the children that you take onto the land is you get them to take their shoes off, and the importance of that. And I think I might just throw that back to our other panelists. If we, it's wonderful to consider these big concepts, but what can we do when we walk out of here at the end of the day? What can we do tomorrow? And Colin, I'm going to come to you first of all.
Well, I really like what you were saying, Rupert. I think, when we go out into the natural world, we encounter, frogs, and we encounter birds, and we encounter water and rivers and so on. And where I come from in the evenings, particularly at this time of year, you hear this chorus of frog song out in the rivers around us, and they're singing at the top of their voice all the way through the night. Why? Because they're singing, and because the song is vital to creation, you know. And why do birds sit in the trees, making the sounds they do? I remember once when I was very young, up in northern Botswana, I was with my father, and we were camped on a river, and we woke up one morning, and across the river there was a little yellow bird, and it was sitting up in the top of a tree, and it had its head thrown back, and it was singing at the top of its voice, this sort of repetitive chant. And it so happened, people used to come from all over the place to spend time with my dad, and it so happened that there was actually an ornithologist with us. And I asked him, I said, well, you know, why is the bird doing that? And he said, well, it's calling a mate. And so I kind of was satisfied with that answer, and that was the end of that. But several years later, we were in another part of Botswana, and we woke up one morning, also by a river, and there, up in the tree, was seemingly the same bird, with its head thrown back, singing at the top of its voice, and right next to it was its partner, also singing at the absolute top of its voice. Why? Because they were singing. And song is absolutely critical, and nature is filled with it. So I quite agree. We need to be doing the same. You know, we've kind of created this culture where it's the gifted few who stand up under the lights and sing, and the rest of us kind of cringe in the darkness and appreciate that and get a bit inspired by it. But I think we're all called to sing. So that's one thing we could definitely be doing. We could be adding to the song of the universe, of the one song. And in doing that, we're participating, I think, in creation and in singing creation into being. Then I think we also can move with that in the same way that the trees move in the wind, that the oceans have their movement. We're called to move as well, and we could call that dance. We're called to dance. And again, it's something that we've tended to stifle ourselves away from in these modern times. You know, I sit certainly crouched at my desk over my computer for hours and hours on end, very little movement, and my back suffers from it, and my body stiffens. And in the same way, the world we live in, the modern world we live in, is echoing that. There's a kind of a stiffening and an atrophying that's happening. We don't dance enough. So we could be dancing. And in singing and in dancing, and also there's a way in which our shared commune emerges out of that, and we reflect on that through the stories we tell, and we can be sitting telling stories. So these are things we can do, and I believe very deeply we should be doing, and we used to do it. So growing up in traditional cultures in Southern Africa, this is what people do. They sing, they dance, they tell stories, they make offerings in a sacred way to the ancestors. They reflect on our past in the sacrosanct nature of nature all around us. They do what we did here this afternoon. And this is thoroughly generative. And I think that we're called back into all of that. We're called to remember what we really do, and what the rest of nature does. And in doing that, I think that the craziness that we've got ourselves into will be mitigated.
I'm just going to ask you, Colin, I've heard you talk before about the sense of when we do these things and this expectation we have, certainly in the West, that something dramatic is going to happen, that we're suddenly going to hear some voice. I wonder if you can just speak to that a bit, about how the repetition of these, of moving and dancing, and what happens in that repetition.
Well, sometimes dramatic things do happen, so we shouldn't discount that. But more often than not, it's a gradual process. There's a softening. There's a way in which a kind of coming to life starts happening, and it happens within ourselves, and it happens all around us. And through that, there's a regenerativeness, a healing. Let's call it that. But we have to keep doing it. We have to keep doing it. And if the frogs stop singing, a deathly silence falls over the land. And everything suffers for that. And, there was a time 15, 20 years ago when the frogs stopped singing in the river around us for no apparent reason. Clearly, I think there are reasons, but they just stopped singing, and there was a deathly silence at night where there should have been the sound of frogs. Oddly enough, very recently, in the last 2 years, suddenly they've started singing again. Where were they all that time? I don't know. Were they there and just not singing? And what was it that caused them to sing? Well, one of the things that's happening in Botswana now is that traditional people are beginning to become very disillusioned with modernity and all the promises that seem to come with modernity, and they're restoring an interest in their traditional ways, and they themselves are starting to sing again. And I believe there's something in that. There's a synchronicity that's happening there. There's some sort of regenerative process that's happening there. And it happens in these ways, and that was quite a dramatic way. But gradually, I think, as we do these things, certainly what I feel in myself is, that when I do these practices, the world changes around me. My experience of myself and my world changes, and it changes in magical ways. In other words, magic is invoked when we do these things.
Lovely, Colin. Thank you. Manda, can I come to you with the same question? If you could advise the people here to go out and do something tomorrow, what would it be?
Okay, so at the risk of sounding slightly unoriginal, I would say listening to the land is really high on the list. I asked, that's what came. But I think, but in order to listen to the land, we have to do the inner work. I think at the moment, there's a lot of outer work we could be doing, and that's really important. But the inner work is essential. The outer work is useful, the inner work is essential. We need to thaw the places that are frozen. If trauma is an event frozen in time inside us, we need to thaw those places. We need to become fluid again. And when we become fluid enough, there's a sense, certainly for me, there's a crystalline sense of the inner stillness that lets the voice of the web of life become clear. One of my early teachers said, our head mind, our heart mind is very shy and it will whisper, and that's the connection with the web of life. But our egos, our head mind will whisper. That's what it takes for us to think we're listening to our heart mind. And so our generation hasn't got the luxury of waiting till we die and coming back again to sort stuff out. We have to sort it out now. So whatever it takes to do the inner work, to get that clarity, so that we're not triggered, because triggers are traumas that have come to the surface. We have to grow up, essentially. Bill Plotkin has this concept that our culture is locked in early adolescence. And I'm not a great fan of spiral dynamics. In fact, I'm a complete anti-fan of spiral dynamics. But they have the kind of, what is it? Wake up, grow up, clean up, show up. What, say the order? Tell us. You have to wake up first, though. Wake up, clean up. Oh, is it? Okay. Anyway, it involves waking up, cleaning up, showing up, and growing up in some order that I clearly have not internalized. But all of those, we need to do them, and they have to become the most important thing in our lives. The commitment to, I commit all of myself in service of life, and I ask for help. I think the idea that we can do it on our own, everyone on the panel has said that. And I ask every morning, I speak to my ancestors of blood and of spirit, but then I turn around 180 degrees, I face the other end of the timeline, and I ask for the help of the generations yet unborn also. Because they, I would imagine, and certainly it seems to me, have really fixed quite strong opinions about what's useful and what's not, of what we're going to bequeath to them. And with that, with the past and the future, if we can be humble enough to ask for the help of whatever it is that we think that is helping, and then listen and act on the answers, then I think that would be really useful.
Just take us through your morning ritual again, because I feel that.
Okay, my morning ritual is slightly more complicated than that. But part of it is that I face the direction. So for me, I face the southeast, which is where for me is the place of the ancestors. And I speak to the ancestors of my blood lineage and the ancestors of my spirit lineage. I also speak to my parents and my grandparents. But ancestors of blood and of spirit and of guides, guardians, soul group, and fellow travelers. And then I go to the southwest, which is the place of the dream. But then when I go to the northwest, which is diagonally opposite, so the timeline on my altar runs southeast to northwest, and the dream line runs southwest to northeast. So I face the northwest, which is, amongst other things, the place of the generations yet unborn. And I open the timeline and I ask every single morning for the help of both to inform me in the present. So that, and it doesn't take very long. Thank you.
Thank you. Rupert, I'd like to ask you the same question. I'm sure part of that will be getting out there and walking, but have you got other rituals and practices that you'd like to encourage people in this room to take on board?
I myself do a yoga exercise every morning, which I'm sure many people here do, called Surya Namaskar, Salutation of the Sun, which is a prostration. I always do it for facing the window, because I do it indoors. But one thing I learned in India is the way that people sacralize each day. And devout Brahmins will go to a holy river and immerse themselves at dawn in the river, and then face the sun and chant the Gayatri mantra, one of the fundamental mantras, asking the sun to illuminate our meditation. So I think just sacralizing the day is one thing, and starting with the sun in the morning is it combines with a yoga. If it's combined with this yoga practice, it's good for your health as well. But I find it a very helpful way of starting the day. And then another practice I find, which I already touched on, is that wherever I go, I try and find the sacred center and visit it and connect with it, give thanks for the fact I'm there, honor the place, and ask for blessings on my time there. And if I'm in India, I go to a temple. Or if I'm in a Muslim country, I go to a mosque or a dargah, a shrine of a Sufi saint. But here in England, the most obvious places are cathedrals and churches. And here in Oxford, I've already mentioned Christ Church Cathedral. I haven't been there yet because I only got here earlier today, but I plan to go there tomorrow. And if I were here longer, and if the weather were better, I'd go to the Oxford Botanic Garden, which is a wonderful kind of, because of plants from all over the world, to honor the plant kingdom. We have here like a temple of plants in the Oxford University Botanic Garden right next to the river. And there are other places in Oxford. I mean, I love Addison's Walk at Magdalen, where you can go round and then you can visit the river itself, the riverbank, and willowy places near the river. So I find that as a practice, turning every journey into a kind of pilgrimage by finding the sacred center. Sometimes it's an ancient tree, sometimes it's a holy well. And there's a marvelous book published by the British Pilgrimage Trust called Britain's Pilgrim Places, which has hundreds of really holy places all over Britain. Wherever you are, you can find one near you. And I find this a very good way of connecting with the place, connecting with the tradition. And I find it links me to the place and the tradition and to nature, because these are holy places, often in important natural sites. And Wells Cathedral, for example, is at the east end of the cathedral are these sacred wells. So the water wells out of the earth. That's why it's called Wells Cathedral. It's their sacred springs. And so very often these temples and churches and cathedrals are built at ancient sacred places. Many of our village churches have ancient yew trees in the churchyard, and sometimes the yew trees are 1,000 years older than the church. For me, that's a practice that anyone can do anywhere, and I find it really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Rupert. And just to say, I know that we have in the earth altar down here, you that was asked and told Lulu that to take the you to Oxford and to decorate this room today. So that's fantastic to bring that in. Sandra, can I bring this discussion back to food and farming and say, as a farmer, growing food, what do you do on a daily basis, and what would you encourage people in this room to do in terms of food and farming?
Thank you, Fran. So as a farmer, what do I do on a daily basis? Wow. So when I get to the land, the first thing I do is take my shoes off. I really like to feel the land on my feet. I talk to the birds. I then begin my conversations with the worms, and then Mr. Robin comes, and then, we have a lot of fun playing music and listening to the land and talking to the land. So that's the first and foremost thing that I do. I get connected, and then I listen, and 9 out of 10 times I have a list of things that I need to do, and 9 out of 10 times I don't do any of the things on the list, because the land always has a different plan. So in terms of the actual practical things that I do in growing food, there's this ritual that I do, which is when I sow seeds, I chant to the seeds, go grow with love, go grow with love, go grow with love, go. And 2 hours later, I'm still going, go grow with love, go grow with love, because I've forgotten. I'm still talking, I'm still chanting, but that sound, that energy, it just takes you to other realms. So I know that those seeds that I'm sowing are generating that love frequency, and the people that are going to eat the food that we're growing are going to feel the power within. And we live and affirm that food that we're going to consume is going to support us in unlocking these so-called superpowers or dormant powers that we have that are waiting to be let out. So those are some of the simple steps that we do when growing foods. What else? Everything that we do is about giving back to the land and to humanity. Obviously, the compost making is another great way that we have so much fun with the sisters and the children in getting all the foliage, because in nature we know that it's all about death and rebirth, right? So making use of the natural materials and having fun while we're doing it is so important. The compost, like I said, we gather all the foliage materials that we don't, and make a use of it, break it down and make a use of it, and that's fun when we're doing it together and we're stepping it again. There could be 5 or 6 women and we're all having fun, singing and doing all of that. What else? So everything really that we do on the land is about giving back. There's so much that happens, but there's this nurturing and this sense of humility and this sense of love and softness that goes into it. Even when we are digging the land, we do that with intention, with that supreme, it's not a supreme, but that good intention. We know it's really with a certain intent. I know that when we're working the land and we're cultivating the land, that our food is going to grow and is going to support the people that we're growing the food for. And I truly believe that the food grown with love intention really does have some magical powers. It helps you to sleep well. It really nourishes you and your cells. it makes you closer to nature, closer to your ancestors. Mindfully, it really does something to you. It unlocks, I don't know if farmers here, or even if you're not a farmer, where when you've been on the land and you almost felt like a bubble just went kluk, and all of a sudden you look around and everything is just so clear, right? So those are all the works that we do to help to unlock the superpowers through the food that we grow, by giving back to nature, following nature's footsteps, because we're not doing it because we went to school and we learned. We're listening, and nature's telling us what to do. It's not coming from us, it's coming from spirit, it's coming from that divine intelligence, and we're humble enough to know this. And that's also what we pass to the children. One thing that I would like to just very quickly address as well, with regards to the children as well, is when we first started teaching, I recall asking the children about 10, 13 years ago, where this food come from. And it was just a very simple question. The answer was, it comes from the fridge, it comes from the cupboard, it comes from the freezer, it comes from Tesco's shelves. No children, none at all, out of a class of 30 children, said it comes from the land. 12 or however many years on, I asked the same question. Every single one knows it comes from the land. And actually, and that ensures me that the work that we're doing, it's being well received. I mean, it takes time, but it's happening. So I would like to also just bring it to say and congratulate everyone that's here for the works that you're doing, because it takes a community coming together, all of us, to make the changes that we want to see happening. And it takes us nurturing, supporting, being there for each other so that we can co-create together what's already in place, because we're only here to do the works that we're meant to be doing. We're here because we were put here to do those works. Let's not kid ourselves, right? So we're doing the works. Big everyone up for doing the works and for finding yourselves here. And yeah, all I can say, we're doing it. We're doing it. Ashe.
Well, thank you, Sandra. I think you said it there. And on that note, I'd like to throw it open to the audience, either to ask any of our panelists questions, but also if you just feel moved to stand up and talk about something that you want to say about your own process, about today, about your own land. Please put your hand up. We've got another mic down the back there, I believe.
I really wanted to bring a question that's been something I've been sitting with. In all this discordance we see in the world that we can put down to human agency, we are, in discussion here about how we step into a different relationship. And yet I still find that we're very central to that discussion or that vision. I don't know how to articulate it brilliantly, but how can we do what it is that we're called to do, and at the same time take ourselves away from the center of everything? It just seems that everything is articulated according to human needs, according to human designs, what we need, when we need it, how we want it to be. I'm just really interested to put this to this beautiful panel. What does decentering look like, and at the same time showing up?
I think the first thing that I would say, in terms of my experience again of growing up in Botswana, is that traditionally there, what people would say is that there's a saying in the traditional language there, which is, I am very small, and there's everything so much bigger than who I am. And in some sense, I need to be both cognizant of that and in service to it. In that sense, the notion that we as humans are the biggest here, that we are somehow at the top of a pyramid of things, and that everything else is and should be in service to us and to our endeavors. So nature is harnessed into serving what we what we believe we need. Traditionally in Botswana, that would have been an anathema. So I think the first thing is to upend that notion and to say that we are very small and there is something so much bigger out there. And I think that the way we can embody that is by returning ourselves to the notion of our lives being in sacred service. So being in sacred service says that I am in service. Everything I do is in service to something much, much bigger than me. And everything I do has profound consequence to that. And so how do I become consistently sensitized to the consequences of what I do? And how do I place myself in such a way that everything I do is generative to that which is much bigger than me, to the rest of creation in some way. And I think as we do that, there's an automatic way in which we do dethrone this notion that everything should really be in service to us. And we place ourselves in a different stance. We take on a different stance in relation to our lives and in relation to everyone that we share creation with.
I think that I've always wanted to know something I've never found out, and I've lived in Oxford for many years, why the river in Oxford is called Isis. And is it to do with a sacredness that most people are missing? That we need to find out what's at the root of names that we give places. And I think very, very often they remain not fully known. And it's important. These words are important. I think that's the basic question. If anyone knows.
I don't know if anyone does know the answer.
Does it come from the goddess Isis? I think, did the Romans bring Isis, the goddess, from Egypt because they had a connection to Egypt, and then, because the Roman Empire was closer to Egypt, so they would have had a connection to Egyptian, and so it could come from there, and Isis is the goddess of healing.
I was just going to say that for the last year, we've been working on something which has involved working together and in a group. And there are lots of us, and we're all making something happen in a gang. And nobody is in competition with each other, and everybody's principles and philosophy and purpose is aligned. And as a result, all of what everyone's described happens on its own. So it isn't hard when you're doing it right from the heart. And it's the people that stop you having hubris and being individualistic in the way you do everything and thinking it comes from you. The ego is the enemy, and actually when you're doing it in a gang, and the most extraordinary thing is most of the people in our team are Gen Z, are under 30, and that's what makes me hopeful and excited. So that was all.
Sorry, nothing to do with that, but just to go back to the ISIS business. No, I don't know either. But I was just going to say, crossing the bridge this morning, I looked over and I was, as usual, very disappointed to see it looked like the colour of milky tea. And someone hadn't been listening to the land upstream because most of their soil was in the river. But pleasingly, there was a family of otters playing there. And it was just absolutely magical, and it set me up very nicely for today. And thank you, Fran, for a gorgeous day.
Thank you. That's John and Joanna, who are the founders of Groundswell. So I really want to acknowledge that the idea of all of us working together collaboratively and driving this forward. I think we're going to have to call it the end of the panel discussion. So I just want to thank my incredible panelists, Rupert Sheldrake, Colin Campbell, Manda Scott, and Sandra Salazar.